The Inquisition was a Catholic judicial procedure where different groups from the Catholic Church were tasked with combating heresy and maintaining orthodoxy established in the late 12th century. The first was the medieval Inquisition taking place in 1184. Initiated under Pope Lucius III, its purpose was to root out heretical movements such as the Cathar and the Walden that the Church saw as threats to its authority. With that being said, the Spanish Inquisition, founded in 1478 by King F2 and Queen Isabella of Spain, is the most infamous iteration, led initially by Tomás Dorada. It targeted people that were previously Jewish or Muslim and now publicly following Christianity, and the Church justified their actions under the idea that some of them were still secretly practicing their former faiths. The Church also later targeted Protestants and other descendants, and the methods employed, such as public trials, forced confessions under torture, and executions by burning, sparked much controversy. The Roman Inquisition, established in 1542 by Pope Paul III during the Counter-Reformation, focused on suppressing Protestantism and investigating scientific ideas like those of Galileo Galilei. The Inquisition justified its actions as necessary for the salvation of souls and the preservation of Christian unity. However, critics condemned its harsh punishments, lack of due process, and the persecution of marginalized groups. Over time, the Inquisition gradually declined. Mind and power in the Spanish Inquisition was officially abolished in 1834, while the Roman Inquisition evolved into the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, which still exists today but with a drastically different mission. The Inquisition remains a controversial subject, seen by some as a dark chapter of religious oppression and by others as a misunderstood effort to maintain order in unstable times. The Jacobins were a radical political group during the French Revolution, known for their role in the Reign of Terror, founded in 1789. As the Society of the Friends of the Constitution, they derived their name from the meeting place, a Dominican or Jacobin area in Paris. Initially a moderate group advocating for constitutional monarchy, the Jacobins evolved into a revolutionary force, calling for the abolition of the monarchy and the establishment of a republic. The Jacobins rose to prominence in 1792, and they championed radical reforms including universal male suffrage, social equality, and Christianization. After the monarchy was abolished in 1792, the Jacobins became dominant in the National Convention, which was the revolutionary government. Their most controversial period was the Reign of Terror between 1793 and 1794, during which they implemented harsh measures to suppress perceived enemies of the revolution. Thousands were executed via guillotine, including Queen Marie Antoinette and former King Louis XVI. The Jacobins would justify their actions as necessary to protect the revolution from internal and external threats, emphasizing the virtue of the republic over individual lives. The Jacobin power dwindled after the fall of Robespierre in July 1794, marking the end of the Reign of Terror. In the dismantling of the Jacobin Club, the group was officially disbanded in 1794, though its ideas and influence continued on in later revolutionary and socialist movements. The Jacobins remain controversial, viewed by some as champions of democracy and equality, and by others as advocates of authoritarianism and political violence. The Confederate or the Confederate States of America were a coalition of 11 Southern states that seceded from the United States in 1860, leading to the American Civil War. The Confederacy was founded in February 1861 in Montgomery, Alabama, with Jefferson Davis as its president. These states sought to preserve their economic system, which was deeply rooted in slavery and to assert their belief in states' rights. The Confederates' most controversial action was their defense of slavery, which they deemed essential to their agricultural economy, specifically in cotton production. Their secession was triggered by the election of Abraham Lincoln, whose anti-slavery policies were perceived as a threat. The Confederacy's Constitution explicitly protected the institution of slavery and emphasized the sovereignty of states. The Civil War began in April 1861 when Confederate forces attacked Fort Seward in South Carolina. The Confederacy waged a bloody and destructive war against the Union, resulting in over 600,000 deaths. Despite early victories, the Confederacy faced internal challenges including economic instability, lack of industrial capacity, and a divided population. The Confederates ultimately surrendered in April 1865, and they dissolved with its state gradually reintegrating into the Union. During Reconstruction, the Confederates remain highly controversial, symbolizing for many the defense of slavery and racism, while others, specifically in the South, have romanticized their struggle as a fight for states' rights and regional identity, with some still supporting the ideas of the Confederacy to this very day. The Ku Klux Klan, abbreviated to the KKK, is a white supremacist organization founded in 1865 in PKI, Tennessee by former Confederate soldiers. Initially, the KKK operated as a secretive vigilante group, targeting African Americans and their allies during the Reconstruction era to suppress their newly gained rights. Following the Civil War, the Klan's controversial actions included lynchings, beatings, arson, and intimidation through cross burnings and other terror tactics. These acts aimed to undermine Reconstruction efforts and restore white dominance in the South. The Klan's violence contributed to the erosion of federal protections for African Americans, culminating in the end of Reconstruction in 1877. The first Klan disbanded in the 1870s after federal crackdowns, but it was revived in 1915. The second wave expanded its targets to include Catholics, Jews, immigrants, and other deemed un-American in the KKK. Gained millions of members nationwide during the 1920s but declined due to internal scandals and public backlash. A third resurgence occurred during the Civil Rights Movement in the 1950s and 60s, opposing desegregation and racial equality. The Klan committed bombings, killings, and assaults such as the 1963 Birmingham church bombing and the killings of civil rights workers in Mississippi. While the KKK is largely fragmented into smaller groups today, it remains a symbol of racial hatred. No single leader has unified the modern Klan, but central figures have sought to rebrand its image, and the Klan's persistence highlights racism and its influence on American history, serving as a reminder of the destructive power of hate and extremism. Zionism is a political and cultural movement advocating for the establishment and support of a Jewish homeland in the historic land of Israel. It emerged in the late 19th century in Europe, primarily in response to rising -1 Semitism and nationalist movements. The movement was formally organized in 1897 during the First Zionist Congress in Basel, Switzerland, led by Theodor Herzl. Considered the father of modern Zionism, Zionists aimed to create a safe haven for Jews in Palestine, then part of the Ottoman Empire. Through settlement, international diplomacy, the movement gained momentum after World War I when the British issued the Balfour Declaration in 1917 supporting a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. However, this led to tensions with the Arab population who opposed Jewish immigration and land acquisition. viewing it as a threat to their own aspirations for self-determination. Controversial aspects of Zionism include its role in the displacement of Palestinian Arabs, especially during the 1948 Arab-Israeli War following the United Nations Partition Plan and the establishment of the State of Israel. Many Palestinians were expelled or fled during this period, creating a lasting refugee crisis. Zionists argue that their actions were necessary for Jewish survival, specifically after the Holocaust, which highlighted the need for a secure homeland. Zionism remains active today, though its nature has evolved with debates over issues like settlements, borders, and Palestinian statehood. While Zionism succeeded in establishing Israel in 1948, it remains a source of controversy, with critics labeling it as colonialists and supporters defending it as a legitimate liberation movement for the Jewish people. The Black Hand, or unification of death, was a secret Serbian nationalist organization founded in 1911 by members of the Serbian military. It aimed to unite all South Slavs under a single independent nation, free from the Austro-Hungarian empires. Control. The group's motto emphasized national unity or death, reflecting its commitment to its cause. The Black Hand engaged in covert operations, including assassinations, propaganda, and acts of sabotage to destabilize Austro-Hungarian rule in the Balkans. Their most controversial act was orchestrating the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary on June 28, 1914. Gilo Princip, a member of the Black Hand-affiliated Young Bosnia group, carried out the killing, sparking a chain of events that led to World War I. The group justified its actions as a means to liberate South Slavs from foreign domination and achieve self-determination. However, their violent methods and secrecy drew criticism, and their role in triggering the war remains highly controversial. Following the assassination, Austria-Hungary held Serbia responsible, issuing an ultimatum that resulted in the war. While the Serbian government denied direct involvement, the Black Hand's actions heightened tensions and contributed to the conflict. In 1917, the Black Hand was disbanded after internal power struggles within Serbia, and leaders of the group were arrested, tried, and executed on charges of conspiracy against the Serbian monarchy. The Black Hand's legacy is complex, as it is seen by some as freedom fighters striving for national unity, and by others as reckless individuals whose actions had catastrophic global consequences. World War II. Germans, or the National Socialist German Workers' Party, were a far-right political movement founded in 1920 in Germany, emerging in the aftermath of World War I. The party gained prominence under the leadership of Adolf Hitler, who became its leader in 1921. They capitalized on widespread economic despair, resentment over the Treaty of Versailles, and fears of communism to gain support. Their ideology centered on extreme nationalism, militarism, and racial supremacy, specifically anti-Semitism. They sought to establish a totalitarian state and a quote-unquote racially pure Aryan society. After seizing power in 1933, they implemented oppressive policies targeting Jews, Romani people, LGBTQ individuals, disabled individuals, and political descendants. These measures culminated in the Holocaust, the systematic genocide of 6 million Jews and millions of others. During World War II, they also pursued aggressive territorial expansion, leading to the invasion of Poland in 1939, which triggered World War II. Their controversial actions included mass atrocities, the use of slave labor, and violations of international law. They justified their actions through propaganda that promoted German superiority and framed their wars of conquest as necessary for quote-unquote living space their reign, ended with their defeat in May 1945 and after. Hitler took his life, Germany surrendered, and the Allies dismantled their regime. The Nuremberg trials in 1945 to 1946 prosecuted key leaders for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Their regime remains one of history's most infamous groups, symbolizing hatred, oppression, and genocide. The Soviet Union, officially known as the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, abbreviated to the USSR, was a Marxist-Lenin state founded in 1922. After the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, it was established by Vladimir Lenin and the Communist Party, encompassing Russia and other Soviet republics, including Ukraine, Belarus, and Central Asian states. The USSR sought to create a classless, stateless society based on communist principles, replacing capitalism with centralized economic planning. Controversial actions by the Soviet Union included political repression, censorship, and large-scale purges under Joseph Stalin, who succeeded Lenin in the late 1920s. Forced collectivization and rapid industrialization led to famines, most notably the Homer in Ukraine, causing millions of deaths. Stalin's Great Purge from 1936 to 1938 targeted perceived enemies of the state, resulting in widespread executions and Gulag imprisonments. The USSR played a critical role in World War II, defeating Germany, but occupying Eastern Europe, establishing communist regimes in countries like Poland and Hungary. This led to the Cold War from 1947 to 1991, a geopolitical conflict between the USSR and the United States. Controversial actions during this period included the suppression of uprisings in Hungary and Czechoslovakia, and also interventions in Afghanistan. The Soviet Union also supported socialist revolutions worldwide, fueling many proxy wars. The Soviet Union dissolved in 1991 due to economic collapse, nationalist movements, and political unrest, ending the Cold War. While celebrated for defeating fascism and achieving scientific milestones like space exploration, the USSR remains controversial for its authoritarian rule, human rights abuses, and influence on global conflicts. The Viet Cong, officially known as the National Liberation Front, was a communist guerrilla group formed in South Vietnam. In 1960, the group sought to overthrow the US-backed South Vietnamese government and unify Vietnam under communist control, aligning with the North Vietnamese government led by Hoi Minh. The Viet Cong emerged during the Cold War as part of the global struggle between communism and capitalism. Their controversial activities included guerrilla warfare, assassinations, sabotage, and the use of terror tactics against civilians who opposed them. They conducted surprise attacks on military targets and infrastructure such as roads and bridges to destabilize South Vietnam. One of their most infamous actions was the Tet Offensive in 1968, which was a massive, coordinated attack on South Vietnamese and U.S. forces during the Vietnamese New Year. While it failed militarily, it significantly shifted global perceptions of the Vietnam War. The Viet Cong justified their actions as part of a liberation movement against foreign intervention in an oppressive regime. They drew support from rural South Vietnamese who were dissatisfied with the corruption and inequality under the president and later leaders. The Viet Cong were heavily supported by the North Vietnamese army and received aid from the Soviet Union in China. They effectively disbanded after the fall of Saigon in 1975, which marked the end of the Vietnam War and the reunification of Vietnam under communist control. The Khmer Rouge was a radical communist group that ruled Cambodia from 1975 to 1979 under the leadership of POD, emerging as the armed wing of the Communist Party of Kampuchea. The group formed in the 1960s under Cambodia's political instability and gained power following years of civil war influenced by Mao principles. The Khmer Rouge sought to create an agrarian utopia by dismantling urban society, private property, and modern technology. Upon seizing power in April 1975, they evacuated cities, forcing millions into the countryside to work in agricultural communes. They abolished religion, education, and currency, attempting to erase Cambodia's existing social and cultural structure. Their controversial policies led to mass executions, forced labor, and starvation. Intellectuals, professionals, religious figures, and ethnic minorities, including Vietnamese and Cha Muslims, were targeted as enemies of the regime. The Khmer Rouge's actions resulted in the deaths of an estimated 1.7 to 2 million people, which was around a quarter of Cambodia's population. The group justified these actions as necessary to build a pure, self-efficient society and eliminate perceived threats of their revolutionary goals. The Khmer Rouge's reign ended in 1979 when Vietnam invaded Cambodia, overthrowing the regime and installing a new government. Although the Khmer Rouge was driven into the jungles and waged a low-level insurgency for years, the group gradually dissolved by the late 1990s. Their legacy remains one of the most horrific examples of ideological extremism, serving as a reminder of the destructive potential of unchecked totalitarianism and radical social engineering. The Weather Underground, also known as the Weather Underground organization, abbreviated as the WO, was a radical left-wing militant group active in the United States from 1969 to the mid-1970s. It emerged during the Students for a Democratic Society, a progressive student activist group, during the height of opposition to the Vietnam War and domestic social injustices. The WO took its name from Bob Dylan's lyrics, which were, "You don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows." The Weather Underground advocated for the overthrow of the United States government, which they saw as imperialist and oppressive. To achieve this, they engaged in controversial actions, including bombings of government buildings and symbols of power, such as the U.S. Capitol in 1971, the Pentagon, and the State Department in 1975. They aimed to avoid casualties, often issuing warnings before their attacks, but their early actions, including the accidental explosion of a Greenwich Village townhouse in 1970, resulted in deaths. The group justified its violence as a mean to bring attention to systematic racism, the Vietnam War, and economic inequality. They believed peaceful protest was insufficient to provoke meaningful change and viewed their actions as part of a global revolutionary struggle. The WO operated secretly, relying on safe houses and a network of supporters to evade law enforcement. By the mid-1970s, internal divisions, dwindling public support, and FBI pressure weakened the group. Many members resurfaced, and charges against them were often dropped due to government misconduct and surveillance. The Weather Underground officially disbanded in 1977, and their legacy remains controversial, with critics condemning their violence and supporters highlighting their commitment to challenging injustice. Hamas is a Palestinian militant organization and political group founded in 1987 during the First Anapa, which was a Palestinian uprising against Israeli occupation. It emerged from the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood with the goal of establishing an Islam state in historic Palestine and opposing Israeli Occupation Hamas's charter written in 1988 calls for the destruction of Israel. In the establishment of an Islamic State, Hamas is highly controversial due to its use of violence and terror in pursuits of its objectives, and the group has carried out bombings, rocket attacks, and other forms of violence against Israeli civilians and military targets. These actions, especially during the Second Intifada from 2000 to 2005, have led to significant loss of life and damage, which Israel and many other countries consider acts of terror. Hamas has also been involved in the internal Palestinian political struggle, specifically against the rival political party F, which led to Hamas taking control of the Gaza Strip in 2007. Hamas justifies its violent tactics as a legitimate resistance against Israeli occupation in an expression of Palestinian nationalism. The group has maintained that it is fighting for the rights of Palestinians and their self-determination. However, it is also known for its authoritarian rule in Gaza, including restrictions on freedoms and political opposition, as well as its harsh treatment of LGBTQ individuals and women. Hamas's influence continues on to this day, specifically in Gaza, where it maintains control despite efforts by Israel and the international community to isolate and weaken it. The group is officially classified as a terror organization by Israel, the United States, the European Union, and several other nations. Al-Qaeda is a militant Islamist organization founded in 1988 by Osama bin Laden, Abdullah Aam, and others during the Soviet-Afghan War, initially created to support Afghan guerrilla soldiers fighting against Soviet forces. It evolved into a global terror network aiming to establish a worldwide Islamic caliphate and expel Western influence from Muslim-majority countries. Al-Qaeda is notorious for its controversial and violent actions, most notably the September 11, 2001 attacks on the United States, which killed nearly 3,000 people. These attacks triggered the US-led war on terror, including the invasion of Afghanistan to dismantle Al-Qaeda's base and remove its Taliban allies from power. Other controversial acts include bombings of U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania in 1998, the 2000 USS Cole bombing, and numerous attacks worldwide targeting civilians, military personnel, and symbols of Western influence. Al-Qaeda justified its actions as a response to perceived oppression of Muslims in the presence of U.S. forces in the Middle East, specifically Saudi Arabia. Osama bin Laden, who led the organization, died in 2011 during a US raid in Pakistan, and on al-Wari ended up succeeding him. Al-Qaeda's decentralized structure has allowed affiliates such as Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb to continue operations globally, although weakened by military campaigns and leadership losses. Al-Qaeda has not disbanded and remains a threat through its affiliates and ideology. The Taliban is an Islamist militant group founded in 1994 in Afghanistan during the country's civil war, originating from religious students along the Afghan-Pakistan border. The Taliban aimed to restore order, implement strict Islamic law, and establish an Islamic emirate. The Taliban quickly gained control of most of Afghanistan by 1996, overthrowing warlords and establishing a theocratic regime. Their controversial rule included harsh enforcement of Sharia law marked by public executions, floggings, and severe restriction on women, including banning education and employment. They also destroyed cultural landmarks such as the ancient Boman Buddhas in 2001. Citing religious reasons, the Taliban harbored Al-Qaeda, including its leader Osama bin Laden, from Afghan territory. This led to the US-led invasion of Afghanistan In late 2001, which toppled the Taliban regime, the group retreated to rural areas in neighboring Pakistan, continuing to wage an insurgency against Afghan and NATO forces. For 2 decades. The Taliban justified their actions as defending Islam in Afghanistan against foreign occupation and corruption there. Tactics included bombings, attacks on civilians, and targeting schools, specifically those educating girls. Despite international efforts, the Taliban remain resilient, especially due to external supports. In 2021, the Taliban returned to power following the withdrawal of US and NATO forces taking control of Kabul and re-establishing the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan there. Governance remains controversial, with ongoing concerns about human rights violations, specifically against women and minorities. ISIS, also known as the Islamic State, is a jihadist militant group that emerged in 2013 during the Syrian civil war. It evolved from Al-Qaeda and Iraq, which was founded in 2014 and later fractured due to ideological differences under the leadership of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. ISIS declared itself a caliphate in 2014, claiming religious and political authority over Muslims worldwide. ISIS is infamous for its extreme brutality, which included mass executions, slavery, forced conversions, and the destruction of cultural heritage sites. The group carried out or inspired numerous terror attacks globally, including in Paris in 2015, Brussels in 2016, and Manchester in 2017, killing thousands of civilians. ISIS's use of propaganda, specifically through social media, helped recruit fighters from around the world. Pyongyang estimated 40,000 foreign fighters from over 80 countries. The group justified its actions as enforcing a strict interpretation of Islamic law and re-establishing the caliphate. It claimed responsibility for targeting quote-unquote infidel Shia Muslims and those deemed heretics. ISIS controlled vast territories in Iraq and Syria between 2014 and 2017, ruling with extreme violence. ISIS began to collapse in 2017 after losing its major strongholds such as Mosul and Iraq and Raqqa and Syria due to coordinated military efforts by the US-led coalition Iraqi for and Syrian Democratic Forces. By 2019, it lost its territorial caliphate, though it remains active as an insurgency. ISIS's legacy is one of devastation, radicalization, and ongoing threats, with affiliates still conducting attacks in the Middle East, Africa, and beyond. The past is full of secrets, and there's so much more to explore. Subscribe now to Spectral History and join me in unraveling the mysteries of history.